This is The Extra Mile.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to The Extra Mile. I'm Justin. I'm always here with my favorite co-host and colleague, the G5. George, how are you?
Good. Do
you like how I did my pause? The
G5. I did. You're too kind to me. Too kind. Oh, man.
No. I thoroughly enjoy our conversations.
Oh, yeah, I enjoy our conversations.
It's time for coffee.
Yes,
Fill the time while I pour the coffee.
Okay. Wow. Preacher, fill the time. It's never been harder for any other preacher.
We need to get it back in the. Caleb is always here with us. Thank you, Caleb, for being here, and thank you for what you do.
He's mic'd up now, so you don't have to be like turning up the volume to hear what he says, and then hurting your ears when Justin laughs or I laugh.
Hello.
See, it sounds good.
Yeah.
He sounds good. You want some of this coffee?
Yes, please.
Awesome.
Oh, there you go.
Well, how have
this
you been?
episode brought to you by the Ember mug.
Seriously.
Please, Ember, sponsor us.
Did you know we already had several people say, "Oh, I've got one. I bought one because of that,"
No
or
kidding.
like, yeah, or it's really interesting. What is that? And ask more about it.
Well,
for
Ember,
real.
if you're listening to this.
Yeah, I know. Put that on our short. See if it gets in here.
See, Ember, there's this amazing space right here where we can feature your products and also drink from them.
And they have a red one now. I really want a red one.
I know.
Send me a red one. You had your birthday not too long ago, is that right?
That is correct.
And how old are you?
I am 37 years old.
Cool. And
Colossians 3:9, you can't lie to each other.
that's right. You wanted to lie, though, huh?
No, I actually, in my 20s, I wanted to be old. And now that I am old, I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have been wishing for that.
Really? So I never felt that.
Yeah, I've had the goatee, so I look older.
I've always never wanted to be old.
When I got the gray, it's like, oh. And now I can't shave my goatee because I look weird. I look weird anyway.
The other day I got a haircut, and she shaved too, and she turned around and she was like, "Man, you look completely different." I was like, "Is that in a good way or like a bad way?" I hope that's good. Made me feel real uncomfortable. I'm like, okay.
You know, I had always envisioned David like the sculpture, like Michelangelo, and he was always just like this baby face and gargantuan. You know, he's this giant of a man, which he wasn't, but the statue is. And then when you read 1st and 2nd Samuel, he was bearded, and you can tell because he was playing madness to the Philistines
At a young age.
And when he was young, he was bearded, and because he said that he let the spittle run down his beard, and it shocked me.
Interesting. I never caught up on that little detail.
Yeah, where it struck me because I thought, oh, David has a beard, which makes sense living in the wilderness, but then it also kind of fits into that concept where people of the Bronze Age, they were typically bearded.
I can't imagine it being a very thick beard, though. I mean, I imagine it being kind of blotchy, maybe a little straggly.
I think archaeology, they showed that they had, like, shears. I mean, obviously, because they had sheep, so they would have to shear the sheep somehow. So
and they would shear their face.
Yeah, they had tools to do that. And in the Roman times, it was actually really popular to keep a cropped hair like we kind of do now. Well, the mullets are coming back in style now, but, you know, just sort of how you keep your hair short rather than long like Samson would have been. But the Romans were very prolific in shaving their face. So they would take a razor because they had steel, and they would shave their face. So it was really popular that's why you see those Roman statues where they're all pockmarked and stuff.
Have you seen the Michelangelo?
Have I seen Michelangelo?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Are you that old, right?
No,
no.
I'm
Have
not
you
that old.
seen the statue of David?
I have in person, yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering that.
It's at the Louvre.
That sounds so cool. Some actor was telling me about how that experience really interests him because I don't know if this is true. I haven't been, but before you go and you see the statue, there's these half-done statues.
Oh.
Is that right?
I'm sure it is. Yeah, it's surrounded by statuary.
Yeah.
So it's in a portion of the Louvre where there's this rotunda, and then the statue in itself is inside of that, and it's framed quite beautifully, very 1700s framed, where you're in this hallway and you look way down the hallway and there's this gargantuan statue. And it looks, from far away, it looks normal size. And as you walk toward it, it gets larger and larger and larger. But that makes sense where you're sort of surrounded by these little broken Grecian marbles that were stolen from Greece and are now in the Paris Museum. And they're just sort of small and normal human size. And then you turn and there's this 5-story tall statue.
Perfection.
It's truly Michelangelo being like, oh yeah, you want to make a human size? Well, I'll make it 5 stories tall. Like that's how he was. I mean, I don't even know him, but like you could tell from his artistic output where, yeah, you look at a man's creation, right? You'll know them by the fruits.
Yeah.
And so you look at the Sistine Chapel, say, and way up there, and I remember from art class, they were talking about how he built scaffolding. How do you paint on a ceiling, right? Do you paint above your face? What you do is you lie down. And so you're lying on your back painting the ceiling on scaffolding. And you can tell that Michelangelo painted the whichever side of the chapel, but it's a third of it. And then he took the scaffolding down, and all of these huge people that he had painted up close, when you're at the floor staring up at the ceiling, they're itty bitty and you can't see any detail. So then when he re-erected the scaffolding and did the middle section with the god and the cloud and the robe, rushing toward Adam, who has no life in him, and you've seen that where the fingers are barely touching. So when he painted that, they are gargantuan. And then when you take the scaffolding down, you can see it now, because it's all about perspective. Anyway.
That's so good.
His artistic output is quite. And then Raphael in some of the chambers of the Pope. I've never actually been there, but I've studied it. And so they have these sort of chambers for the Pope's living quarters, which I think he could live in them now, but it's really just for the tourists. Because Raphael painted these amazing pictures. That's where you see like Plato, and You've probably seen
that famous painting where he's like walking around talking to people
and
stuff. Yeah,
when they have gesturing and they're frozen in time. So that's where all of those are.
Interesting.
Yeah,
interesting. Can I tell you a secret?
Yeah,
I have a dress sock with the statue of David on it, and
in all its glory.
In all its glory.
You have a what?
A dress sock.
A dress sock. With the statue of David on it.
Like dress socks for church.
Yeah.
Well, that's the question. If it's
do you wear them
for church? I feel compelled when I'm talking about David.
I mean, God created.
But when I sit down and my pant leg rises,
the glory of man is exposed in many ways.
Anyway,
secret. It's God's creation, I suppose.
Speaking of God's creation, I want to do a thought experiment. Let's open up with that idea.
We'll mark this time as the end of Chit Chat.
Oh man! All right. So a thought experiment here I had. It might be a flop. It might be a flop, but we'll see. I don't know. I had this thought the other day, but I'm gonna give you an example here. If I were to give you a pet hamster, and your job is to prepare a home for it. But the catch is, this hamster is only going to live for 2 seconds. What kind of home do you build for this hamster? Go.
I would have to build a home in 2 seconds, or I would prepare a home.
You'd have to prepare a home for a hamster that only lives for 2 seconds.
My first thought went to Legos. I would build a house out of Legos.
You would build a house out of Legos?
Probably. I love Legos.
Wow. Caleb?
Well,
the hamster will only live for 2 seconds.
I don't have a huge passion for hamsters. We had hamsters when we were kids, and one bit me. Another one did some morbid things that I don't really think we could talk about on a podcast. But, man, if I had to build a house for a hamster, and I knew it was only going to live for 2 seconds.
Yeah, it's only going to live for 2 seconds. You know this.
I would probably find a couple of pieces of wood and make
a sheet,
like a lean-to, because the hamster's only gonna live for 2 seconds.
For 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Justin, you go to the extra mile, man. You're like, I'm going to spend a lot of time, making a Lego house for it. Like, wow.
And then if it makes a mess and it's 2 seconds that it's alive, you can hose it off. And then you have this cool Lego. Like, honestly, I'm going to be real with you. I would probably buy like a Harry Potter. Actually, the Rivendell, the Lego set that you were like, we'll just let him live among the hobbits.
Oh, man. You're so much nicer than I am because I was just like, here's a box and enjoy your life. A box. Yeah, for real. It's only going to last 2 seconds. And I give you that thought experiment to put ourselves in the hamster's perspective. Because there's times where I feel like I look at the world and I look at creation and I feel kind of like I live in a fish tank, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
And I got to thinking, well, God tells us that we, to his eternal perspective, is but a vapor.
That's right.
Right? And how long does a vapor last? A single vapor.
Well,
it can't last very long, but only seconds.
I get a lot of experience with my colleagues who currently vape. They can fill a room and then
it's gone.
And then it's gone.
It's gone. It's kind of like that hamster that seems to last only 2 seconds. And what's amazing to me is, from his perspective, we last but only seconds. And he took the time to create something that's unimaginable. That's really beautiful. It actually made me admire the fish tank, if you will, a little more than I had. I was looking at it pessimistically when I actually now I can actually think of this optimistically. There's so much more, and God loves me that much. I don't know. Now, there's a lot of, it's not the best thought experiment, but I was thinking about that. Maybe, of course we're not hamsters. You said you're not very fond of them, so that has some sort of degree. God also cares about us to some degree, more than Caleb cares about hamsters. So, I don't know. I thought that interesting. I think us as humans, we don't care as much. And so for a hamster that only lives for 2 seconds, we wouldn't do much about it. Except for you, Justin. But God, he cares about us more than we care.
Yeah.
And that really made an impact on me, I guess.
No, I think that's amazing to think in that perspective. Why would we care? Now, I think purposefully, perhaps I detected a hint of the loaded question, but to prepare a place, like Christ tells us that to his own disciples and to us, he says, behold, I go to prepare a place for you.
Yeah.
And he says, in my Father's house, there are many rooms and many dwelling places. He says, if it wasn't that way, I wouldn't have told you. And then he says, I'm with you always. And then that's right before his ascension. These moments of God caring, I love the creation story. There's an amazing piece of music that Aaron Copland, an American composer, wrote. It's called In the Beginning. And we performed it here at Texas Tech. And it takes about 16 to 18 minutes to perform this piece.
Wow.
And it takes the Genesis chapter 1 and then I think the first half of chapter 2. And Copland orchestrates through every key. There are 13. Is that right? No. There's more than that. There's 28 keys. 14. There's 14 keys. Give me a second. We're going to edit this out. Yeah, so like there's minors and majors, and then there's every pitch on the scale. So there's 12. So there's 24 keys. That's right. So he goes through all of these keys, and see, I doubted myself. Shouldn't have doubted myself. But he takes the creation story and he orchestrates every scene. And so like when it talks about the creatures in the ocean, that Copland makes the music sound this way, and he does text painting. And that struck me performing that piece because it took us many months to prepare that in the choir at Tech. But the performance of it was always very striking to me, and it's very inspiring to think that God cared enough to create the world for his hamsters,
Really, really though.
for his humankind to dwell. And the telling thing about the creation and creating is that God said that it was good. And so I guess in your thought experiment about a hamster that would only live a couple of seconds, or some creature, why a box?
I'm thinking it's only going to last 2 seconds. I'm not going to put in any effort. It's I guess what my thought is there. And so the least amount of effort I'm going to put into it, because it's only going to last so long. I'm giving the hamster quality by how much time it has, rather than, say, if we're the hamster and God created us, the likeness that he put into us. Where God doesn't see it that way, even though we're on this earth for what seems like a vapor, according to James 4:14, he actually sees us. He gives it. We have more quality than just the time that we spend on this earth to him. I think that's the point I'm trying to make there. He really puts emphasis that we were created in his likeness, and you're deserving of a home that is good as he created it, of his likeness. And we don't even do that for ourselves. It really showed me how much more caring God is for us than we are for ourselves or for other people. Instinctively. I don't know.
No, I think you're right.
I mean, I'm just being, just kind of fun. It doesn't have to take this thought experiment seriously.
No, I think we are. And what's the takeaway point? So our instinct is, as you were saying, is just, well, rationally, they're 2 seconds of life. Oop, there it went. It died. It was that soon. Why would you put in the effort? And the fact that God did put in the effort and does put in the effort.
Yeah.
That's a takeaway point. So what do we need to do in our life?
It should help us put in more effort than we actually do. And we can read that passage. Look at James chapter 4, where it says that. It says in verse 13. I like this version. It's cool. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into this or that town and spend a year there and do business and make a profit. So they're putting in effort, but it's the effort to make money. You do not know about tomorrow. What is your life? For you are this says a puff of smoke, which is interesting. We can go into the literal translation of that. You are a puff of smoke, a vapor that appears for a short time and then vanishes. You ought to say instead, if the Lord is willing. All right, that's important to note with our analogy. God was willing to create a beautiful world for us. Then we will live and do this or that. But as it is, you boast about your arrogant plans. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows what is good to do and does not do it is guilty of sin. So that puff of smoke literally is referring to, when someone would hear that in the Greek, a swirl of smoke rising from a fire, essentially, which is really interesting. So that in a sense lasts a little longer than 2 seconds, but the point remains, it's only for a short amount of time, and we have to ask ourselves, if the Lord is willing to have us on this earth, what effort are we extending, right, to profit ourselves or to glorify God?
Mm-hmm.
And we should really be extending more effort to glorify God than we realize, because what God has done for us, the effort that he put in for us. And so what plans do we make to glorify God? Too often we're sidetracked and distracted by the plans we make to profit ourselves. What kind of money can I make? What's the get-rich-quick scheme that I can come up with? And I get money causes pain, the lack of money, too.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something there.
I think you're right. This has always sort of troubled me, and I think that Troubling because you always hear, okay, we don't want to be arrogant. So that's one of the takeaways here. We don't want to be arrogant. We don't want to do what is evil, because James says in verse 16, I'm losing my eyesight. 16, but as it is, you boast in your arrogance. So if you say these things, if you're like, well, we're going to do this is our plan, right?
Yeah.
James's look into our hearts, or God's look into our heart, is that we're boasting in our arrogance. All such boasting is evil. We don't want to do anything that's evil. So you've also heard many, many people say like, oh, well, Lord willing, we'll be back tonight, or Lord willing, we'll see you tomorrow.
Right.
Or Lord willing, it's just, should that just always be on our tongue like a mantra, or should it be written in our hearts? That's what's troubled me.
Yeah, I can see that.
And so, I mean, Jesus's other, I was going to say parabolic, but parable teaching. Parabolic is not, that's something else. Anyway, rocket science. But his teaching in his parables about the bridal party that has its lamps and it's waiting for the bridegroom to come, always be in readiness.
Cracks me up, that one. Yeah.
Well, and so to always have it on your hearts. And so that, to me, that's the takeaway lesson, or at least that's how I had interpreted it, is that we don't always need to say, well, if the Lord wills on our tongue, as much as we need to have it written on our heart.
Right. They're making excuses. Look, I have some sheep I need to attend to. I have a wife I need to attend to. They're making excuses other than being with God, is your point there.
Yeah, I mean, and
they're extending their efforts somewhere else.
Well, it's not a commentary. I'm just observing other people, because they literally say, well, we need to always have this on our tongue. And my interpretation of it, I had been struggling with that, is, do I need to always have it on my tongue, or does it need to be written on my heart? I know that today is a gift and that tomorrow is precious. And I think that's another takeaway point, is that with your thought experiment, in the eyes of the hamster, who's only here for the length of a vapor. I mean, we have our lives, right? And it's so tragic when we die. It's so tragic when our loved ones die. But in the eyes of God, that is just a blink of an eye. But then we have the time that is allotted for us. And the New Testament talks about that a lot. The final point that you said in verse 17, therefore, these concluding words are just sort of we're going to wrap this concept up with this moral lesson. To one who knows the right thing to do and doesn't do it, to him it is sin. So we don't want to do anything that's evil. We don't want to boast in our arrogance. So we need to have, that's a lesson. We need to understand that our time here is very limited. It's a couple of seconds and we're gone.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so in that time, that precious time, the then next lesson, verse 17, is that we need to know what is right, seek it out, and do it.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever been under pressure for something and you know what you need to do? You have a lot of things that you need to do, but you just don't do it because you have all this time. But whoop, once you have only a certain amount of time and only a little bit of time and you're under pressure, now you know what you need to do. Now you know the priorities. Now you know what needs to get done first. Well, that's what God is saying here. He's saying, look, because of the amount of time that you have, because you're only a vapor, you know what is good. And yet if you do know what is good and you don't do it, you're guilty of sin. And he's asking us, realize that for a second. Because, look, I created this world and you know instinctively what is good, right? We can see, we can appreciate. We know what we need to do in a short amount of time. It's the question, do we really step back and appreciate that for a second? That in God's eternal perspective, he put in the effort for us. Are we going to put any effort for the little amount of time that we have?
I think obviously the answer is yeah, we need to.
Yeah.
So then my question is, how do we know? How do we know the right thing to do? How do we remove arrogance?
Man, I mean that.
We as the hamster.
Yeah. We as a hamster.
Because that's essentially continuing with your thought experiment. The hamsters are arrogant because they think they're going to live forever.
So the text always answers the question of the text, right? If that makes any sense. Usually, 9 out of 10 times, if you have a question about a certain text, you can find the answer within that text. Not always, but I find that it's often common.
Okay.
Up a few verses. Number 4.
Verse 4.
Yeah, verse 4.
You adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God? He calls us adulteresses.
Yeah, he does. That's how you spend your time. Keep going. Till verse 10.
Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Or do you think that the Scripture speaks to no purpose? He jealously desires the Spirit, which he has made to dwell in us. So God wants our spirits. But he gives a greater grace. Therefore, it says, God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be miserable and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning, and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the presence of the Lord, and he will exalt you.
So I think that speaks to what you're talking about, that idea of how we get rid of this arrogance that we have. We have to draw closer to God in a sense. You know, God opposes the proud, and he gives grace to the humble. Even greater grace, it says. So if we take our hamster analogy and we just spoof it up a little bit. This is a half-baked thought, so I don't know where this is going, but we'll see. You were talking about, Caleb, your lack of appreciation for the hamster. What if we added something of more quality to us, like a baby that we know is only going to last for so long, right? It's born and we know it's only going to last minutes. There's been examples of that. What do? I don't know. If I was in that situation, I just want to hold that baby for as long as it's going to live. And when I read this passage, you know, when it says verse 8, draw near to God and he will draw near to you, that's kind of what I'm picturing. Is God holding us in that sense, like that baby, it's only going to last a few minutes. And if I were that baby, that's all I'd want to be. If I knew I was only going to last for a vapor, which God tells us, you know, we do, that's where I want to be. I want to be in the arms of God. And so we need to be living our life as if that's the case.
My daughter does that. Our evening routine, she wants to snuggle with Dad, and that's really sweet. And I love those moments because there are other times during the day where she doesn't really want to be around me. And I think that continues your analogy to say that when she draws near to me, she wants to, like, well, I want to snuggle with Dad. Then it's sort of like, no, go to your bed. I want to have it. But then it's like, well, okay. Because I know those moments are precious.
Yeah. There's only so
but
many.
Then that's what God is telling us. That's what James is telling us God is wanting. He wants our souls. Not in the I want your soul, but I mean, he created our souls, so he desires for us to want him.
Right.
He's given us free will, just like my daughter doesn't want to be around me sometimes. But then those times where she does, that needs to be the takeaway lesson for us. What you're saying is that as we draw close to God, he wants us to draw close to him.
I like that you brought in free will here for a second, because if this life, to God's eternal perspective, is but seconds, then you have a second to make a decision. Do you choose God or do you choose yourself? And he's saying, I oppose the proud and I give grace to the humble. I draw near to those who choose me. And he draws near to everyone, but he really wants those that are going to want to be with him, if that makes any sense.
He loves us enough to let us go and do what we want.
Yeah, there's that idea of free will. Yeah.
And that's really sad because we can choose arrogance, as the lesson is saying. It's that we can choose ourselves. We can choose our tribe. We can choose our people. We can choose whatever mantra, whatever doctrine we follow. And God desperately wants us to choose him. And I know that there might be people listening to this that will roll their eyes and that's the end of it. They've already made their choice. And that the great appeal comes from those who say, choose God and humble yourselves and know that this beautiful creation, this beautiful world, there is evil that man invents. in this world, and it's really sad to watch it. And these are things for us to pray about and ask for God's help, because God created it. He can do what he wants.
Yeah.
And if it's his will, as we humble ourselves, if it's his will to stop those things.
Right. And so what kind of effort are you going to then expend, right? Are you going to, on this life in the world, and he gives the answer there in verse 11, do not speak against one another, brothers and sisters. He who speaks against a fellow believer or judges a fellow believer speaks against the law and the judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but its judge. But there is only one who is a lawgiver and the judge, and the one who is able to save and destroy. On the other hand, who are you to judge your neighbor? It goes back to loving others and loving God as well. Speak to them nicely. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, as it says earlier in James chapter 1, I think verse 19. And so expend effort that glorifies God, that rests in his arms, where you are resting in his arms, like you're saying, and you humble yourself. Realize, I only got a vapor, I only got a second. I'm going to make the decision to choose God here. And I really appreciate this amazing creation that God placed me in just for a second. I like what you said as well.
There's a great fear toward God. And I don't know if it's meant to be illustrated that way, but that God is the fearful creator. And then when it says to seek God and work out your faith with fear and trembling, and that's the reason why we have Christ, where Christ became man. He understands. I mean, God always understood, but God lived it and showed us the way. And it hurts me when I see a lot of I'm just going to say the Christian nationalism that seems to be prevalent, where they've forgotten Christ. They claim to be followers of him.
Right, this is where politics is my God, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I read of Jesus in the Bible is that Jesus is entirely about love,
Mm-hmm.
and entirely about passionate love toward God and obedience. And the times where he was filled with furor and fashioned a whip and drove out the money changers, it was passionate for God and obedience to God, and that he was trying to root out corruption. And so we call that righteous anger. But anytime a sinner, he had encountered a sinner, not once did he wield the whip toward them. He showed them compassion. And that's the Christ that we read about in the Bible. And God is fearful. God is the creator. God will bring wrath and judgment. And he despises the arrogant. And that Jesus is God that shows us the love and the compassion that we need to have in our hearts. We, the hamsters who only breathe for a few seconds of vapor.
Right. And so, again, I think we need to end on that point like you're talking about. We're the hamsters. How do we prepare ourselves? And when you extend effort that speaks well of others and draws us closer to God.
That's right.
All right. Well, I think that's a wrap, man.
Thanks, Caleb.
Yeah.
Thanks, George.
Go so.